Hello YouTube, and we're back for part 2 of my series of basically what would I do to improve Elite from this standpoint, and we're going to be looking today at the background sim, or the BGS as it's oftentimes abbreviated on Reddit and the forums and other places. Now this is where I do have to put in a caveat to say that I've really not observed too much into the background sim and tried to figure out exactly all of its inner workings and things of that. So there may be things here that do work a little bit better, but my biggest problem with the background sim is basically its presentation to the general playing public of the game. And those who have wished to engage with the background sim and figure out all of its nitty-gritty details, I think that was great for the first year, again, of not spoon-feeding it to you with a silver spoon. But at the same time, I think we've now beyond that point to where in order to make it more accessible to the general public, there's a few things that need to change. So what is the background sim? Well, this is basically what simulates the rest of the galaxy, the rest of the universe, with the NPCs doing their thing in the background to affect what happens. It determines system states, minor NPC faction states, who takes control of station, what triggers civil wars, civil unrest, boom states, famine, outbreak, all of those things. It also generates missions. Now, it tends to generate missions more in terms of flavor text than mission types, and those mission types, I believe, truly having an impact on what happens in the background sim. But again, it's very hard to determine this because we lack any type of real feedback from within the game to show what impacts, if any, our experiences in playing it is actually having on that star system. It also generates production from an economic standpoint. What goods are available at a station is dependent upon station type, as well as other factors to say what their quantity is, therefore their price, and production levels, and things of that nature. Again, a lot of this happens behind the curtain and behind the veil, and it's not presented in such a manner in which people can really comprehend. And that's really my big problem with it, is the lack of visual feedback to players to indicate what's actually going on in the background sim, because there are times where people are like, is this working as intended here, or is it a bug, or what's going on? And the fact that we don't have this information available to us in any way, shape, or form, at least in any meaningful way, shape, or form, it makes it very hard to tell if there's bugs within the system, or if things are working as designed and other players maybe are doing things that counter your objectives. You can't tell right now. And given the fact that, there is solo, there's offline, there's consoles, and we're all inhabiting the same universe, it would be nice to know that is what I'm doing actually having an impact, or is there other people doing things counterproductive to what I'm trying to do or my group is trying to do. Right now, there's no indication of what's actually going on there, and that to me is the biggest problem. There's also a lack of depth in economic gameplay, aka a production or supply chain, in order to affect production at stations, and we'll touch on both of these. Then you have your edge case bugs. And the only thing I'm going to say here is when you're talking about a system that is generated over tens of thousands of stations with dozens, if not hundreds, of variable inputs, there are going to be edge cases that are hard to account for until they happen. And that's just going to, again, that's the nature of the programming beast, especially when we're talking about procedural generation, random numbers being thrown in there, and just players involved in general. I mean, there were times in the last company that I founded where people out in production would hit a combination of keys or a combination of inputs we could never conceivably test of, and strange things would happen as a result. And the same thing will happen here. Players will have impacts that the game designers, no matter how many times they try to sit down and envision what's going on, will never be able to account for. I mean, even in the process of making this video and just trying to go through and think about some of this stuff through logically, you start going down that rabbit hole and you realize it can get quite complex and quite deep very quickly. So it's one of those things that I empathize with the developers and the designers, especially when they do say that, look, there's considerations if you go down this rabbit hole that you have to consider about impact on other things. They're absolutely right about that. And as I went through basically doing a thought exercise on this, I found, oh yeah, now you'd have to consider this, consider that. and a few other things as well. So, implementing some of these things isn't as simple as I'm probably going to be presenting here today. Biggest problem, as I was saying, lack on the visual feedback. Within the menus right now in 2.2, you essentially have the current faction state, its reputation, maybe a little information about pending states and things like that. And then Galnet articles that, frankly, very few people, I think, actually ever do read. There might be a lot of people out there that read it because of lore reasons that I don't know about. But amongst the people that I've played with over the course of the past 2 years, almost nobody looks at that bottom section of what's going on in Galnet. And even then, the information presented there in the flavor text seems to be more to that. It's more flavor text than I think is really hard information. Even when Galnet was a full left side or right side of the menu. It still, very rarely, I might look at a couple of the headlines, but even then, that was rare. Most of the time, my focus was on the left side of the screen. So what's my solution to this? Well, it's to start out by creating a new tab on the left-hand side of the screen and labeling it Trends. This would take you to a variety of menu screens that would give you charts, graphs, and information on what's going on in the background and the various factors that make up how states are determined, sector states, faction states, things of that nature, what's actually going on there. And I think charts are probably going to be the easiest way in which to deliver that information. These are just random numbers to give an idea. And this is not a new concept. This is from their developer diaries back in alpha, beta, maybe even before alpha, of what they thought the market screen should look like. And I have to say that this is a hell of a lot better engaging screen that never made it out of the concept phase. Now, the reasons behind that, I don't know. But most people take a look at this and say, whenever we click on a product, instead of just having a little bar, previously it would say high, medium, low, now there's a little bar with 3 or 4 little pips. You should be able to click on a product and go to this menu screen. This should be a menu screen that pops up for that product that tells you market price, incoming shipments, either from background sim, players, all of that, and what's been going on with that particular segment of the economy, because usually there's a heading and then several under sub-items in that category, like minerals or metals or things of that nature. And you could go down there to a market analysis over the past 30 minutes, hour, day, week, whatever the time schedule would happen to be for that. Now again, how much is the database set up to able to handle this type of transactional information? I have absolutely no idea, and perhaps that's the reason why this was eventually scrapped, but this is something that they should be striving towards. Again, the saddest part about this isn't coming from the community, this is from Frontier's own development process. And I would really like to know, and maybe it's been said somewhere and I've just missed it, why isn't this in the game at this point in time? Because I definitely think it should be, and if it isn't, it should be reprioritized to make it into maybe not 2.3, but this is something they should be shooting for 2.4 or 3.0 at the very latest. And I would have charts for different political factors, such as food supplies, medical supplies, security factor, bounties issued versus bounties collected, production supplies, for whatever that station produces as far as goods, and how this all factors into population contentment. And, if things aren't going well, that'll lead to civil unrest. Now, some of this information, I believe, is known by people who follow the background sim to a degree. But again, it would be nice that if this information was presented in a more public display that is accessible at station menus. Maybe even if you go in and scan a navigational beacon in a system, maybe that downloads the information to your ship's computer and you can view this from inside your ship. It would certainly give you something else to look at while maybe you're super cruising 40,000 light seconds to a station for delivery or something like that. Some of this information probably should also be made available into your ship. Again, scanning a nav beacon when you go into a system, for instance. I wouldn't mind that being the mechanic there. Next up is economic depth. And this is one that I have to say, of all of the things in Elite Dangerous up until this point, probably disappoints me the most. Again, add in a supply chain. Interestingly enough, bring back this screen and have supply levels that impact production. So that gives people a reason to go out there and mine resources and deliver them to certain stations. Maybe get a group of people to work together for emergent gameplay in order to affect the production of the station, in order to help or hurt, maybe help their bottom line or hurt somebody else's bottom line. Maybe some other group's based out of a station, and if your group starts delivering en masse particular goods, it'll change the production scope of that station away from what that other group wants. That leads to the ability to have more emergent gameplay within the universe without necessarily breaking, I think, the qualities that David Braben and company have been shooting for in terms of what they view in terms of gameplay. And mechanically, the foundations, I think, are there. Have it mechanically similar to engineers. Industrial World produces Widget 1. That requires Metal A, Mineral B, and Technology C. And have supply levels. Over here in the lower right-hand corner where I kind of put something in here and say, hey, for hydrogen, we need water in order to make hydrogen here. And currently our H2O levels are below critical levels and demand is high. So output will be decreased until supply is increased. Water is 15% higher due to demand. And actually tell people what are the effects of what's going on right now, and look at deliveries not only being done by the background sim NPC characters, but also by players and things of that nature, and have it to where players can move the needle maybe, but not necessarily completely control everything. I understand that that's why they want. The results of this would be players are given an agency via feedback that their actions are indeed having an impact on the game world itself, even if that impact is relatively small. Again, maybe you move that needle a little bit, maybe you move that number, 2 or 3 this way or 2 or 3 the other way or something like that. But the ability to show what type of impact, direct impact that you are having on the game world, even if it is infinitesimally small, if that is better reflected, I think a lot more people would be engaged in what is going on in the game world. Also, it no longer is guesswork on what the hell is going on in the background sim. Right now, again, it happens behind a curtain, and it's very difficult to make heads or tails out of whether or not you're basically, caught one of those edge case bugs, if there is a bug in the system, or if things are working in it as intended, but you just can't see it because other players or other factors are going into consideration that you can't directly observe. Now, again, people will say this goes back to having multiple game modes and multiple platforms affecting the same online universe. But if you provide that information in the form of visual feedback and cues and information to the players, they can start to get an idea of what is actually going on. Is it a bug in the background sim, or is it other players being active for or against your objective? Right now, we just simply don't know. And again, it will make it easier to tell if something is going wonky with the simulation part, and now we can actually go and tell Frontier development staff and give them specific examples of, look what's going on here. This is what the data given to us is showing that's happening, and the expected result is something else. So this is probably a bug in your simulation. So I think it would help all parties all around. It would help the folks working on this from a development standpoint find some of those edge case bugs, I think, better than what they can currently. And then also it gives players an idea of just what the hell is going on. Now, why not? Frontier has kind of indicated that at least on the economic front, they don't want players to be able to manipulate markets to a great degree. Even though every time they put up a trade community goal, that's essentially what happens, as now the background sim and the economy has gotten far more dynamic than it was a year ago. I will give them that. Prices are not the same across the universe as much. They do vary more, and this becomes very apparent when there is a community goal, and the stations closest to that community goal with whatever supplies you need tend to run out very quickly, and the profit margins tend to, well, not necessarily dry up. They've taken some steps to kind of fix some of those issues. But at the same time, it's one of those things that this is them having to manually manipulate certain things. Wouldn't it be nice if, say, a community goal is going on and you need some sort of like auto fabricators? And for auto fabricators, you need platinum and magnetic emitter coils and something else. Well, while that community goal is going on, maybe you don't want to directly intervene with that, but because of that and demand is rising at the stations, you could provide the materials needed to produce those goods, and by doing that, you increase the production rate for the people who are participating in that community goal, and probably a nice tidy profit to yourself. Or maybe you need to go out and for the miners to go out and mine those resources. They need to mine platinum or palladium or gold or whatever materials are needed and to bring it into that station. Again, for an uptick in profit. If you can see what's going on behind the scenes, it gives you a better idea of how to play the game from an economic standpoint and not having to rely on, EDDB for just, well, the price here is what it is because that's just what people have reported. Being able to see that and maybe even predict market trends. Saying, I know in the next 5 production ticks that they're going to need more of this material, so you run out and supply it and be ready for when that happens. Just some ideas and stuff there that I think it, kind of, why the hell not? It will lead to emergent gameplay and more emergent gameplay. And then you could continue to have NPCs act as Keynesian actors. And if you're not familiar with Keynesian economics, I'm not going to go into detail. Google is your friend. I'm sure there's a Wikipedia article or 5 on it. So, at any rate, basically you have the NPCs come in and function as a balance to the equation to make sure the markets don't get too out of whack. Maybe you can trigger a flash crash or a flash production surge or something like that if a large group of players come in and try to flood the market with something. But within a few production ticks, the background sim would basically kick in and make any of those type of shortages or oversupplies basically even out over time. So if you do have an impact, it might be a direct impact, but it'll probably be a temporary one, again, until the NPCs come in and essentially balance out the economies at that station. So, you get player impacts to markets temporarily, and it does lead to emergent gameplay, and I don't think that there's any real huge negative downsides, at least from my side. Finally, I would hire an economics PhD candidate. Find somebody working on a PhD in economics and sponsor the research to come in and model a simulated virtual game world economy for their dissertation. Other companies have done this before. I believe London Studios have done that for Second Life. I know for a fact that CCP Games have done that for Eve. And if you're really wanting to figure out how to make this a little bit more dynamic and some of the inputs that go into it, hiring in somebody that, even if they're not a full PhD, somebody working on their PhD who has a background in economics, if not already on staff, probably should be in order to help model this segment of the game and help flush it out and expand it. And the United Kingdom has some pretty damn good economic schools, like places like, Cambridge, London School of Economics, Oxford. There should be a plenty of talent in country to find somebody that is capable of doing this type of work. Hell, even somebody with an MBA could probably do a decent enough job, but probably you want somebody who's going for a doctoral work or maybe even working on postdoctoral work in a PhD in economics. So why are these elements so important? Well, this is the foundations that I would use to build more emergent gameplay on top of. And again, I think that they have enough of those core mechanics actually kind of there. Things just need to be tweaked a bit. And I could be totally wrong about that too. Again, I don't know how much information that Frontier's databases serve or store on all of this type of information, what type of network traffic that this would generate, and problems that could basically come from having to store and regurgitate that type of information. This is an area that I know quite a bit about because the software that I have been involved in designing in my lifetime has dealt with financial and sales, financial inventory tracking, and business side of things. I designed and wrote business software and business systems. It's boring work, yes, but it pays the bills and it pays generally quite well. As one of my friends who went out into programming and did get jobs at game studios, by the time they reached 30, they decided to go work for the boring corporate world where writing accounting software and things like that isn't fun and exciting, but you work 8 to 9 or 8 to 5 and have time to go home, spend with the family, with wife, kids, and make pretty good money. So it's one of those things that, coming from my perspective and my background, I understand some of the technological considerations, the network traffic issues, and things like that. That being said, when you're starting to talk about historical data, getting database reads this day and age with distributed databases, no SQL or no SQL or whatever, there are ways of doing that and getting that information and presented in a form very, very quickly. I've been there, had to program that type of stuff, and or more apt in the last few years, hire people to do that type of work and make sure that it's getting done correctly. But at any rate, those are things from the background simulation point of thing or side of things that I would change, switch up, and all of that. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, leave your comments in the section down below. Tell me all the points that I'm wrong. If you are one of these background sim gurus, you might want to point out areas where I may not be exactly correct, and if that's necessary, I will do correction videos and things of that nature, or point out your observations. Again, these are things that I have personally observed, not having gone into a lot of explicit detail in trying to figure out all of the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, other than enough to say that it's time to lift the curtain in the background and let people see what the hell is going on in terms of the background simulation, and presenting that data and information to the player in a relatively easy way to digest. And again, charts and graphs and things like that, I think, are probably the easiest way to convey that information. So I would like to know your information, feedback, and all that good stuff, and put them down below, and see you next time.